Hello everyone and welcome to Toxic Moonlight. My name is Jared and today I will be covering a commander deck tech for Azor the Lawbringer. Now before I get into this deck tech, I just want to remind you that this deck is my own creation. It is not the do-all end-all deck tech for every single Azor deck that will be out there. So take whatever I'm going to say with a grain of salt. And also if you guys want to see more deck techs, from this channel, go ahead and leave a comment down below of what you would like to see. And if you like what you see, go ahead and leave a like and share button. Okay, let's begin. So let's begin with Azor. So going from the top down, Azor the Lawbringer. For 2 generic mana, 2 white mana, and 2 blue mana, you get a 6/6 legendary Sphinx creature with flying. When Azor the Lawbringer enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during that player's next turn. And whenever Azor attacks, you may pay X generic, 1 white and 2 blue. If you do, you gain X life and draw X cards. There's a lot of stuff going on with this card. The first thing that I noticed that Azor has a converted mana cost of 6. So it's not one of those early commanders like Kumena or such a late commander like Galta. It's just right dead in the center, easily castable, easily achievable by turn 4 or 5 or even 6 if you need to. The second thing is that it's a Sphinx. So it fits into the Sphinx tribal decks that have been running around ever since the Amonkhet set, whenever they had the Sphinx tribal commander. Azor's first ability, its ETB trigger, just completely stops essentially combo players. What I mean is that it stops Narset decks, it stops Rashmi decks, it starts any kind of spell-based deck that relies on spells to win the game. They either can't win by pure damage or just have so many instants or sorceries that are disproportionate to the number of creatures that they have. Its second ability is what I'm going to call the Sphinx's Revelation ability, because that's essentially what it is. Whenever he attacks, you get to cast Sphinx's Revelation. Seems pretty good, considering that Sphinx's Revelation was one of the top cards in Standard whenever it was first released. Not to mention, Azor is a 6/6. So if it gets through, which it probably will get through because it also has flying, it only takes 4 shots to one opponent to completely kill them from the game, which is an astounding feat all by itself. So whenever I build a deck, any deck, whether it's Commander, Standard, or Modern, I always want to look at my win conditions. And in this deck, we have a total of 3 win conditions to win the game. Our first one is the most natural way to win a Magic the Gathering game, which is to reduce your opponent's life total to 0. Sounds pretty easy, right? Now, unfortunately, your opponents are also playing this game, so they are going to try and get rid of your life total before theirs runs out, which is essentially the game Magic. Our second one is a card called Felidar Sovereign, which has you win the game in its card text. So Felidar Sovereign is a 4/6 creature cat beast for 4 generic and 2 white mana that has vigilance and lifelink. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. You just straight up win the game. No ifs, ands, or buts. At the beginning of your turn, if you are at or above your starting life total, you win the game. It is hilariously broken. It can win by turn 4, and I know that because I've won by turn before. And there's even synergy within this deck because Azor, our commander himself, allows us to gain X life whenever he attacks with his Sphinx's Revelation ability. Our third win condition is Approach of the Second Sun. Now, Approach of the Second Sun is a sorcery that says If Approach of the Second Sun was cast from your hand, and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun this game, you win the game. Otherwise, put Approach from the Second Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. Now, this is a 7-drop sorcery, which is a lot, but it does say you win the game on it, within condition. So, how we win with this card is to take advantage of the Sphinx's Revelation draw ability. So you you cast Approach of the Second Sun, then you put it 7th from the top, and then you use your various draw abilities to get it back into your hand to recast it and just win the game. So these 3 win conditions that I have presented are practically the only ways that you can win a game of Commander with this deck, unless an opponent has something to say otherwise. Either they give something of yours in effect, or some other crazy shenanigan that can always happen in a Commander game. But you always want to be trying to achieve one of these 3 win conditions, no matter which one you get first. Whether you're not seeing your Felidar Sovereign or Approach of the Second Sun, you can always go by pure damage. If your board state isn't looking pretty good, but you have a bajillion life, you could just play Felidar Sovereign. Or if you have your draw engine online, you can just cast Approach of the Second Sun and just win the game straight out of nowhere. Now let's get into some of the meat and potatoes of this deck. And one of the first categories that I have for this deck is the card draw category. So what we have first is Nezahal, Primal Tide, as one way to get card draw. Nezahal is a 7/7 for 5 generic and 2 blue mana, is a legendary elder dinosaur creature that can't be countered. When it resolves, you have no maximum hand size. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, draw a card. Then you may discard 3 cards to exile Nezahal and return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So Nezahal has a lot of stuff going on for it, enough stuff to be considered a commander in its own right. But what I like about it is that whenever it enters, you have no maximum hand size, so it makes sure that you don't have to discard the cards that you've drawn throughout the game, that you will be doing throughout this deck. And whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, any non-creature spell, whether it's an enchantment, artifact, instant sorcery, you draw a card. And it's also very hard to remove due to its discard 3 cards and return to battlefield. So it's very, very good card draw that is very hard to remove. Because as long as you keep drawing cards, you're going to be able to discard cards to keep Nezahal alive. Another card that helps our draw engine is Consecrated Sphinx. It is a 4/6 Sphinx creature for 4 generic and 2 blue, has flying, and whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. So in a 4-player game, you're going to be drawing at least 6 cards, not on your turn, as long as Consecrated Sphinx stays on the battlefield, because you're going to be drawing on each of your opponent's draw steps. Another card is Asperia, Supreme Judge. It is a 6/4 Sphinx at the same cost of Azor with flying, and whenever a creature attacks your planeswalker you control, you may draw a card. So not only does it draw you a card whenever an opponent attacks you, it also deters opponents attacking you because they don't want you to draw any more cards. We also have Kefnet the Mindful, which is a 5/5 indestructible flying god for 2 and a blue. Its drawback is that it can't attack or block unless you have 7 or more creatures in hand, but you don't care about that ability. You don't care if you get in with damage on Kefnet. You care about Kefnet's second ability, pay 3 generic and a blue to draw a card, then you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. So In case an opponent is going to try and destroy one of your lands, you can instead activate Kefnet's ability to draw a card and save that land, or simply just to draw a card. You don't have to bounce back a land back to your hand. But Kefnet is a very good mana sink. If you can't get Azor or any other draw engine online, Kefnet can be a very good start. This deck also runs Dragonlord Ojutai, which is a 5/4 flyer with hexproof as long as it's untapped. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you look at the top 3 cards of your library and put one of them into your hand, and the rest in the bottom. So you'll be able to selectively choose a card to put in your hand whenever it deals damage, which is pretty nice. Not only do you attack with a 5/4 flyer in the air, you also get to draw essentially 1 card from your choice of 3. Another card that I have listed is Solemn Simulacrum. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a basic land card and put onto the battlefield tapped. And whenever it dies, you draw a card. So you can use this to essentially draw 2 cards for 4 mana, as long as it dies, because you get to put a land into play, and you also get to draw a card whenever it goes to the graveyard. We also play a copy of Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur, which is a 5/4 for 10 mana, which doesn't sound too good until you read through its abilities. It has Flash, sounds pretty good. At the beginning of your end step, draw 7 cards. That's really good. And then each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. Super good, giving you 7-card draw advantage while giving your opponents a 7-card disadvantage. You play this card in every single conceivable way you can. And then we have Sphinx's Revelation, which is arguably the best Azorius card ever printed. Other than probably Geist's Saint Draft, I think Sphinx's Revelation is one of the best. So we have more card draw detailed on this screen that I would like to talk about. We have a copy of Fact or Fiction, which allows us to selectively choose what kind of cards that we want to put in your hand depending on the situation. We're running Blue Sun Zenith, which is essentially another Sphinx's Revelation, except you don't gain life, but shuffle it back into your library whenever it resolves. We play a copy of Ponder to see if the next 3 cards are worth keeping on top and then draw a card. We're also playing a copy of the Immortal Sun. And let me just spend a second talking about how the Immortal Sun is a powerhouse. So it's hate, it's draw, it's ramp, and it's a pump. So players can activate Planeswalker loyalty abilities. You draw an additional card on your draw step. Spells you cast cost 1 less, and creatures you control get +1/+1. That's a lot of stuff that a 6-mana artifact should be able to do. Another artifact that works wonderfully in this deck is Alhemeret's Archive. It's a legendary artifact for 5 mana that reads, if you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. And if you would draw a card, except for the first one you draw on each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So you know what this means? Whenever you cast 1 Sphinx's Revelation, you get another free Sphinx's Revelation, which is super good. It allows you to draw double cards and gain double life. We're also playing a copy of Rhystic Study and Monastery Siege, 2 blue enchantments that draw cards. So with Rhystic Study, it always annoys players. Players don't like to be taxed on the spells that they're going to get. It's not necessarily a tax because it is optional. Your opponents do have the option to not pay the cost, and you hope that they don't pay the cost. But players don't like this, so it's going to be an easy target for this to be removed. Monastery Siege, whenever it enters the battlefield, you are going to pick cons. If you're ever in a case to pick dragons, you're already losing. You always want to pick cons with this card because the effect to draw an additional card and discard a card on your draw step is super powerful in this deck. So one of the payoffs of drawing this many cards in a deck is being able to use Chasm Skulker. Chasm Skulker is a 3-mana 1/1 squid horror, so already not looking so good. But whenever you draw a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Chasm Skulker. Instantly better. You can already see how many cards that we're drawing in this game, so Chasm Skulker is going to be an insane power and toughness. And it gets better. Whenever Chasm Skulker dies, you create X 1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Chasm Skulker. So if you have, say, a 25/25 Chasm Skulker, you just instantly make 24 1/1 squid tokens with Island Walk, which is an insane power balance. Another part of the deck, or any white-blue deck in general, is its disruption and oppression that it forces onto the opponent. The first card that I want to cover is Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. It's a 2/3 human advisor legendary creature for 2 generic, 1 white and 1 blue. That says white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. So not only are your spells getting ramped, all of your opponent's spells are getting taxed, which is super great. It allows you to get ahead while keeping your opponents behind you where you want them to be. Another part of oppression is in the card Grand Abolisher, which is a 2/2 for 2 white. During your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments, which essentially makes it so you have your turn all to yourself. Like, nobody can interact with you on your turn, the turn that is most important to you. We can also see that type of effect on Teferi, Mage of Jothlir. It's a 3/4 for 5 mana, legendary human wizard. It has Flash, which is super good. It says that creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield have Flash. That means on your opponent's end step, you can just flash it in, and then attack with it your next turn because it wouldn't have summoning sickness at that point. And each opponent can cast spells only any time he or she could cast a sorcery. That means that if it's not their turn, or if it's combat, they put their hands down. They cannot do anything. So having Grand Abolisher and Teferi on the field at the same time completely locks out your opponents from doing anything other than at sorcery speed on their turn. We're also playing a copy of Aura of Silence, which is an enchantment for 3 mana that says artifact and enchantment spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more to cast. That tax is insane because people don't want to pay 3 mana for their Soul Ring. It just becomes too expensive way over time. And it also doubles as a removal spell that says sacrifice Aura of Silence, destroy target artifact or enchantment, which is super good and can be super relevant in most Commander games. Some more disruption and oppression cards are in the form of Windborne Muse that forces your opponent to pay 2 mana for each creature that attacks you. Thalia, which has First Strike and taps a creature whenever it enters the battlefield and a non-basic land whenever it enters the battlefield. We have Propaganda and Ghostly Prison, which essentially do the same thing. That says creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 mana for each creature that's attacking you. We're also playing a copy of Sphere of Safety, which is like Propaganda and Ghostly Prison, except instead of paying 2, they pay X, where X is the number of enchantments you control. We're also playing a copy of Blind Obedience, which says that artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, as well as the bonus of having Extort. And we're also lastly playing a copy of Solemnity, which completely negates Infect, experience counters, -1/-1, any kind of counters that go onto creatures. Any Edgar Markov deck that likes to put +1/+1 counters on their vampires, they're not going to get them because players can't get counters, and counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. Super good, can be super viable in almost every situation that has counter shenanigans. Now, one of the benefits of playing blue is that you get the opportunity to play counterspells. Counterspells are just spells that immediately negate whatever your opponent is trying to do. Now, my first example of Venser Shaper's Vault isn't necessarily a counterspell, but it might as well should be, because bouncing back a spell or permanent of your opponent's is pretty much countering that spell. We also are playing the OG counterspell of just targeting the spell. We're playing Render Silent, which for 3 mana you counter target spell, and that spell's controller can't cast spells for the rest of the turn. Really good, really relevant. We also have Disallow to not only be able to counter a spell, but an activated or triggered ability. We're playing a copy of Rewind, which can be a free counterspell because you untap up to 4 lands. A copy of Cryptic Command, one of the most versatile counterspells and modern playable counterspells. We're playing a copy of Negate to completely get rid of Planeswalkers or anything that we don't like that's not a creature. Playing a copy of Mana Drain to get that extra push of mana that we would probably need next turn. And a Dissipate, which not only counters the spell, but exiles the spell that was countered this way. So now let's look at our removal package. The ones that I have detailed on the screen right now is Spot Removal, or removal that only targets a few things. We have that in the form of Swords to Plowshares, which exiles a creature. Return to Dust, which can exile up to 2 artifact or enchantments, depending on whenever you cast it during the game. We have a copy of Path to Exile, which is like Swords to Plowshares, except they search for a basic land instead of gaining life. We have Council's Judgment, which has a fun mechanic of Roll the Council. So starting with you, each player votes for a non-land permanent you don't control, then exile each permanent with the most votes or tied for the most votes. So you're always going to get rid of at least probably one thing on the board that you don't like without anything affecting yours. We're also having a single copy of Detention Sphere, because if your opponents somehow if each opponent has their Soul Ring, you can name Soul Ring and take away their Soul Rings. Or if an opponent has 50,000 1/1 squid tokens, you can instantly get rid of all of them with a single Detention Sphere. And we're also playing Oblivion Ring, which is like Detention Sphere, except it only targets one thing. And whenever it leaves, they get it back. Seems pretty simple. Now, this part of removal are the board wipes, one of the most essential part of playing white-blue. Our first board wipe is Cyclonic Rift, which says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, but it also has Overload. I don't really see a place where a person shouldn't always be overloading the spell. Like in certain situations where you only need it to live, you can cast it for 2. But in almost every situation, you're going to want to cast it for its overload cost because it's only one-sided. It does not affect you. It only affects your opponents. However, all the other cards detailed on this screen affect everything. They're universal. We have Wrath of God, which says destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated. We have a Day of Judgment, which simply says destroy all creatures. And we have a Supreme Verdict that not only destroys all creatures, but can't be countered. So anybody who's playing blue, you can just put up a big old middle finger at them. Now, what I have detailed under utility are cards that don't really fit in with the other mechanics that are in this deck, but are good to have nevertheless. The first one is Sun Titan. 6/6 for 6 mana with Vigilance. Pretty good. I'd play that. But whenever Sun Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, you may return target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if your opponent decides to, get rid of your Rhystic Study, or your Propaganda, or Athalia, or Soul Ring, you can just instantly get it back on the attack or on enter the battlefield. Another card that we're playing that is really, really good is Teferi's Protection. It simply says you cannot lose the game this turn, or you cannot lose the game until your next turn. If you want to get into more detail, until your next turn, your life total can't change. You have protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out, which are treated that they don't exist. And then you exile Teferi's protection. Super good. Completely can... You'd be able to win on the backswing most of the time that you cast this card. Another card is the Mystical Tutor. It can grab your board wipe. It can grab spot removal. It can grab Teferi's protection. It can grab anything that you really need, a draw spell, and put it onto the top of your deck. So you'll be able to draw it your next turn. And lastly, let's have a pair of Lightning Greaves, because seeing a Sphinx with haste and shroud that draws cards whenever it attacks is super funny. We can also put this on Ojutai to make sure that it can't be interacted with whenever it loses its hexproof whenever it attacks. And we can also put it on stuff that we don't want to lose, like Jin-Gitaxias, or even Thalia, if we really need some sort of tax protection. The Planeswalkers of this deck, we were playing two of them. We were playing Venser the Sojourner and Elspeth Sun's Champion. So let's talk about Venser first, because I feel like he is the most important Planeswalker in the deck. So for 5 mana, you get a 3 loyalty cost Planeswalker with a +2 to exile target permanent you own, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So what that means is that if you have Azor and Venser on the field at the same time, you can go ahead and blink Azor every single turn that you have to completely lock out your opponents from playing instants or sorceries from the rest of the game. Sounds pretty good. This also works with any enter the battlefield effect, so if you have a Solemn Simulacrum or anything like that, its enter the battlefield trigger will happen. And you'll be able to abuse it every single turn. Its -1 are creatures are unblockable this turn, which can help you complete the first win condition of reducing your opponent's life total to 0, but it allows an easy attack with Azor or Ojutai to safely get in for damage and not have any repercussions of being blocked or dying from combat damage. And then Venser's -8, which is a doozy because you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, exile target permanent. So if you ever get to -8 Venser, your opponents are not going to have a fun time because every time you cast a spell, you're getting rid of something on the board. A perfect example is your opponent tries to cast a spell, whether that spell is irrelevant. You cast a counterspell, maybe a negate, and then you also exile one of their permanents. And permanents can be lands. You can get rid of their lands before you start getting rid of their more important permanents on the field. Our second Planeswalker is Elspeth, which is a 6 mana Planeswalker that starts out at 4 loyalty. Now its +1 is put 3 1/1 white soldier creature tokens onto the battlefield. So this can create some blockers. This +1 could be used to outlast until the later game whenever you have a more draw engine or have your more life gain spells. But generally, you always want to be on the defensive with these tokens. Its -3 is pretty powerful. It's destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. So it can get rid of any problem creatures, any creatures that might just kill you in one hit. However, this effect is universal. So if you have Azor or Ojutai or a Chasm Skulker, well, Chasm Skulker would be actually pretty good with the -4. But anyway, you probably wouldn't want to use the -3 without... you wouldn't be able to keep your creatures using Elspeth's -3 if you use this. So just be wary about when you use it. and its -7 is just another way to complete the first win condition. +2/+2 in flying to everything for the rest of the game can be really detrimental and really important to completing the game. Now let's look at the ramp package that we have. These are the only ramp cards that we are playing. It's surprisingly little, but we're not playing green or any of the ramp colors, so not having too much ramp is okay. We'll just make it up by playing lands. So the first thing I want to talk about is Azor's Gateway, because this card is stupidly powerful whenever it transforms. So it reads, you pay 1, tap it to draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. If cards with 5 or more different converted mana costs are exiled with Azor's Gateway, you gain 5 life, untap it, and transform it into Sanctum of the Sun, which is a land that says tap to add X mana of any one color to your mana pool, where X is your life total. So this card's pretty nuts, because as soon as it transforms into Sanctum of the Sun, all of your Sphinx's Revelation abilities and triggers and stuff like that are going to double. So here's an example. You have Azor on the field, and you have Sanctum of the Sun. You attack with Azor, tap Sanctum of the Sun for X, where X is your life total, and then you pay the rest of the Sphinx's Revelation cost, 1 white and 2 blue, to gain X life and draw X cards, where X is your life total. So if you never took damage in this game, your life total goes up to 80, and you draw 40 cards. That's a stupidly insane amount of card advantage. Combine that with Alhemrat's Archive, and you're drawing 80 cards and having 120 life. Stupidly powerful. The rest of the ramp package is nothing too special, kind of your average deck ramp. We have Thought Vessel, which gives you no maximum hand size. We have our Azorius Signet for fixing. We have our Soul Ring, which always nets you mana. Great turn 1 play. We have a Mind Stone, which is pretty good because it can sacrifice itself to draw a card. We have Thran Dynamo to get more colorless mana. We have Gilded Lotus to get more colored mana. We have a Talisman of Progress for its versatility and its ability to create a white or a blue at the cost of 1 damage. So everything in here sounds pretty good and is wrapped up neatly. And the rest of the deck are all the lands. Now what I have on screen are all the dual lands that I would want to play. Nimbus Maze, Glacial Fortress, Command Tower, Prairie Stream, Irrigated Farmland, Hollowed Fountain, Temple of Enlightenment, Azorius Chancery, and Port Town are all very essential to this deck, as well as Adakar Wastes, Mystic Gate, Sea Chrome Coast, Sigiria Refuge, Azorius Guildgate, Tranquil Cove, Tundra, Celestial Colonnade, and Floodplain. The Tundra you probably don't really need, again, if you are on a budget or have no real need to have an expensive commander deck just to get a Tundra, then by all means go ahead and replace it with a Plains or an Island, or do whatever you need to do depending on its availability. We also have some colorless lands in the form of a Reliquary Tower, Temple of the False God, Flooded Strand, Maze of Ith to deter attacks, Strip Mine to destroy Maze of Iths, practically, any Gaia's Cradles or any troublesome lands, Dark Depths or anything. We have Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse to get basics from your deck. We have Core Haven, which is like a Maze of Ith, but not really. We have a Tectonic Edge to get rid of more non-basic lands. We're playing Academy Ruins to basically prevent ourselves from milling to death by putting an artifact card from our graveyard on top of our library. We have Rogue's Passage to make sure that our creatures don't get blocked and can get through for damage. We're playing 1 Serra Sanctum because with the enchantments that we're playing, Serra Sanctum can be getting an average of 5 white mana per turn, We're also playing Minimo, mainly for Ojutai, because being able to untap Ojutai and regain the hexproof ability is super good. And finally, to wrap it all off, we are playing 3 copies of Plains and 3 copies of Islands to round it out to about 37 lands. So that's pretty much the deck. If you are not interested in having Azor the Lawbringer as the commander and would rather have as part of the 99, I would suggest putting him into a Brago King Eternal deck or Grand Arbiter Augustine IV deck. Azor is pretty good in the Brago deck because Brago is able to abuse its Enter the Battlefield trigger, which locks out opponents on casting instant or sorcery spells from the rest of the game. And Grand Arbiter Augustine IV likes Azor because, as well, from the Enter the Battlefield effect, but it definitely enjoys having the Sphinx's Revelation too. Even though it's not an ability, being able to draw cards on a whim is still very good in that deck. And right here, I have the complete deck list for what I just went over. You're more than welcome to write down, copy, paste, screenshot, or do whatever you want with this list. It's for the benefit of you guys, the viewer. If you guys have any questions on this list, go ahead and leave down a comment below. Thank you guys for watching this deck tech. If you guys want to see more deck techs like this, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have any ideas for what I should do for my next deck tech, whether it's Commander, Modern, Legacy, Standard, Pauper, or anything, go ahead and leave your ideas down below and I'll take them into consideration for next week's video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.